Dating for 2 years, but we'd known each other for a decade. When he asked me to move to his country to finally build a life together, I thought I was stepping into our long-awaited future. Instead, I walked straight into a nightmare I didn't see coming. Within weeks, I discovered my boyfriend is still emotionally tied to his ex-girlfriend. Not romantically, he swears, but the bond runs deeper than anything he's ever shown me. Here's the context that makes this impossible to escape. They both grew up in the same cult. So did his 2 brothers. So did his entire inner circle. And because of that shared trauma, they're all extremely close in a way that feels suffocating and impenetrable. They don't have friends outside of each other. They see each other multiple times a week. His ex included, even though she lives in another country now. And here's the part that's slowly breaking me. We live with his 2 brothers, both of them, ages 29 and 37, grown men who act like I'm invisible. 2 things are destroying me. First, the ex-girlfriend situation. Even though she's overseas, I found messages between them. Messages that made my stomach drop. Unresolved feelings. Heavy, intimate emotions that had no business existing between just friends. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He got defensive. Protective of her. He actually said, "I don't want to close that door. We have so much shared history." That sentence almost ended us right there. But I stayed. I gave up everything to be here, and I convinced myself we could work through it. Second, his family is always there. Literally always. Last night we tried to have dinner together, just the 2 of us, and one of his brothers sat down at the table and refused to leave. My boyfriend had asked him to give us privacy. He ignored it, and my boyfriend just let it happen. I've begged to move out and start fresh somewhere, just us. He refuses. I've asked him to talk to his brothers about contributing to this household. Because right now I do all the cleaning, every dish, every surface, every single chore. When I bring it up, he shrugs and says, "They're grown men. I can't make them do anything." I feel completely alone. Even though I'm surrounded by people, I've never felt more isolated in my life. And the worst part? He makes me feel like I'm the problem, like I'm too sensitive, like wanting basic respect and boundaries makes me the demanding one. I've tried explaining how I feel. I've begged him to see things from my perspective. We're even in couples therapy. But every single session, he shuts down. Completely. He won't engage. He won't address the real issues. He says he wants to work on things, but the second I bring up something that hurts me, he interprets it as an attack on his character. Even when I reassure him, even when I go out of my way to tell him I'm not calling him a bad person, he spirals into defensiveness and plays the victim. It's like he can't handle any kind of conflict without making himself the injured party. I want this to work. I really do. But I'm starting to realize that the emotional maturity gap between us might be too wide to bridge. I can't picture a future where I voice a concern, and it's actually heard, where he doesn't immediately twist it into me victimizing him. I moved across the world for a partnership, but I'm starting to think I just traded my old life for a new kind of prison. Before we begin, tell us in the comments from which city are you watching, and at the end, do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The thing about knowing someone for 10 years is that you think you really know them. We weren't dating that whole time, not even close, but we stayed in touch. Occasional messages, updates about our lives, the kind of connection that felt solid, even from a distance. So when we finally got together 2 years ago, it felt like destiny clicking into place. Like we'd been circling each other all this time, waiting for the right moment. When he asked me to move to his country, I didn't hesitate for long. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, I'd be leaving behind my job, my friends, my entire support system. But this was him, the man I'd known for a decade, the man who'd been patient enough to wait for me, the man who promised we'd finally build the life we'd always talked about. I imagined cozy mornings in our own place, exploring a new city together, hand in hand, learning his language, his culture, his world, with him by my side as my guide and partner. I pictured us hosting dinners, traveling on weekends, creating the kind of home that felt like ours, a sanctuary, a partnership, a fresh start that honored all those years of waiting. The flight over was surreal. I remember staring out the window as my old life disappeared beneath the clouds, feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. I was doing it. I was actually doing it, leaving everything I knew to be with someone I loved. He picked me up at the airport with flowers. We drove through streets I didn't recognize, past signs I couldn't read, toward what I thought would be our home. I was jet-lagged and emotional, but I felt safe, hopeful, like I'd made the right choice. And then we pulled up to the house. "This is it," he said, grabbing my suitcase from the trunk. "My brothers are excited to meet you. Brothers, plural, living with us." That should have been my first clue. But I was too tired, too overwhelmed, too committed to see it for what it was. I walked through that door thinking I was stepping into my new life. I had no idea I was stepping into a trap. I knew he had brothers. Of course I did. He'd mentioned them over the years, part of the close family he'd always talked about. What he didn't mention was that I'd be living with them, both of them, grown men, 29 and 37 years old, with no plans to move out, ever. The first night, I tried to be gracious. I smiled. I made small talk. I told myself it was temporary. Maybe they were just staying there while they looked for their own places. Maybe this was a cultural thing I didn't understand yet. Maybe I was overreacting. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't temporary. This was the arrangement. The three of them, my boyfriend and his two brothers, functioned as a single unit. They had their routines, their inside jokes, their unspoken rhythms. And I was the outsider trying to find space in a system that had no room for me. What made it even more suffocating was the realization that they had no one else. No friends, no social circles, no lives outside of each other. I'd watch them sitting together in the living room every single night, talking in their shared language, laughing at references I didn't understand, existing in a bubble I couldn't penetrate. At first I thought it was sweet, a close-knit family, but the longer I stayed, the more it started to feel wrong, unhealthy, like they were stuck in some kind of arrested development, unable to grow or separate or build independent lives. They didn't go out, they didn't invite people over, they didn't do anything except orbit each other. And now I was expected to orbit them too. I started noticing how they'd walk into rooms without knocking, how they'd interrupt our conversations without apology, how they'd help themselves to anything in the house, including things I'd brought with me, without asking. There were no boundaries, no privacy, no concept of personal space. When I gently brought it up to my boyfriend, he looked confused. "That's just how we are," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We're close." Close. That word again. But this wasn't closeness. This was enmeshment. This was a three-headed monster I'd walked into without realizing it. And the worst part? My boyfriend couldn't even see it. To him, this was normal. This was family. This was home. It took me a few weeks to piece together the full picture. The brothers, the isolation, the weird, impenetrable closeness. None of it made sense until my boyfriend finally told me the truth. They'd all grown up in a cult, not a strict religious community, not a close family group, a cult. He and his brothers, and here's the kicker, his ex-girlfriend had all been raised in the same insular, controlling environment. They'd left physically years ago, but emotionally, psychologically, they were still in it. The cult had taught them that outsiders couldn't be trusted, that the only safe people were those who'd shared the same trauma. That loyalty to the group was everything. And even though the cult itself was gone, the programming remained. They still operated like a closed unit. They still clung to each other with the intensity of people who'd survived something together. And his ex-girlfriend, she wasn't just part of his past, she was part of his family. "We see each other at least once or twice a week," he explained casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "She's like a sister to us." But she wasn't his sister. She was his ex, the woman he'd dated, the woman he'd loved, and now, apparently, the woman he couldn't let go of because their shared trauma had fused them together in a way I could never compete with. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I knew trauma created bonds that were hard to break. I knew that leaving a cult didn't mean you were free of it. But understanding something intellectually and living with it are two completely different things. Because here's what it meant for me. I wasn't just dating him. I was dating his entire trauma history. I was expected to accept that his ex would always be there, always be important, always have access to him in ways I didn't. And if I voiced any discomfort, if I suggested that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't healthy for him to be this entangled with someone he used to be romantically involved with, I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one who didn't understand. The ghost of the cult was everywhere, in the way they talked, in the way they looked at me, like I was the outsider, the intruder, the one who didn't get it. And his ex-girlfriend, she was the phantom presence in every conversation, every decision, every moment of our relationship. I'd moved across the world to be with him, but I was starting to realize he'd never really left home. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, and a notification lit up the screen. I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't that person. But the name caught my eye, hers, his ex, and the preview of the message was enough to make my blood run cold. "I miss talking to you like this." My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. I knew I shouldn't. I knew this was crossing a line, but something in my gut told me I needed to know, so I opened the conversation. What I found destroyed me. Months of messages. Long, intimate conversations that happened late at night when I thought he was just scrolling through his phone before bed. Messages where they reminisced about their past together. Messages where she told him she still thought about what they had. Messages where he responded with the kind of emotional vulnerability he'd never shown me. There was nothing explicitly romantic. No, "I love you." No talk of getting back together. But the emotional intimacy was undeniable. These weren't the messages of two people who'd moved on. These were the messages of two people who were still deeply, painfully entangled. When he came out of the shower and saw me holding his phone, his face went white, then red, then defensive. "You went through my phone," he snapped, like I was the one in the wrong. "You're still emotionally involved with her," I said, my voice cracking. "You're having the kind of conversations with her that you should be having with me." "It's not like that," he insisted, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "We have history. She understands me in ways—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "In ways I don't," I finished for him. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated, cornered. "I can't just cut her out of my life. We've been through too much together. I'm not closing that door." "I'm not closing that door." Those 6 words told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't asking him to cut her out completely. I was asking for boundaries, for prioritization, for me to feel like I mattered more than a relationship that was supposed to be in his past. But he couldn't give me that, or wouldn't, because to him she wasn't the past. She was permanent, she was family, she was the person who understood the parts of him I never could. And I was just the woman who'd moved across the world for a man who'd never fully made room for me. The first time I cleaned the kitchen, I thought I was just being helpful. We'd just finished dinner, me, my boyfriend, and his 2 brothers, and I'd offered to do the dishes while they relaxed. It seemed like a nice gesture, a way to contribute to the household while I was still finding my footing in this new country. But the first time turned into every time, and the dishes turned into everything else. Within weeks, I'd somehow become the default housekeeper for 3 grown men. I was wiping down counters, scrubbing bathrooms, doing laundry that wasn't mine, sweeping floors, taking out trash, cleaning up messes I didn't make, and nobody said thank you, nobody offered to help. It just became my job, like it was the natural order of things. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once I found work and settled in, the division of labor would balance out. But I quickly realized that wasn't the plan. This was the plan. I was expected to take care of the house, to take care of them, and any time I tried to push back, I was met with excuses. "I'm too tired after work," my boyfriend would say. "I'll do it later," his brothers would promise, and then never would. The worst part? My boyfriend saw nothing wrong with it. When I finally confronted him, exhausted and resentful after spending an entire Saturday scrubbing a bathroom that 2 adult men had somehow destroyed, he just shrugged. "They're grown men," he said. Like that explained everything. "I can't make them clean." "But you could ask them to," I shot back. "You could back me up. You could tell them it's not fair that I'm doing everything." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to start a fight with them," and there it was. He'd rather let me drown in resentment and exhaustion than have a single uncomfortable conversation with his brothers. He'd rather watch me turn into an invisible maid than disrupt the delicate ecosystem of their enmeshed little family unit. I started to feel like a ghost in my own life. I'd wake up, clean, cook, clean again, go to bed, repeat. My boyfriend would come home, kiss me on the forehead, and ask what was for dinner, never noticing the circles under my eyes or the fact that I'd spent the entire day scrubbing floors on my hands and knees. I moved across the world to be his partner, but somewhere along the way, I'd become his maid, and he couldn't even see it. After weeks of feeling like a ghost in a house that would never be mine, I asked for one thing, just one. A private dinner with my boyfriend. No brothers. No interruptions. Just the 2 of us, sitting across from each other like an actual couple. He agreed. I was so relieved I almost cried. I spent the afternoon cooking his favorite meal, setting the table, trying to create some semblance of normalcy in a situation that felt increasingly insane. Maybe this would be a turning point. Maybe we could reconnect. Maybe, for just one evening, I could feel like I mattered. We sat down. I poured wine. We started talking, really talking, for the first time in weeks. And then, like clockwork, one of his brothers walked into the dining room. "And smells good," he said, pulling out a chair. My boyfriend glanced at him. "Hey, we're actually having dinner alone tonight. Just the 2 of us." I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment my boyfriend would finally set a boundary, finally show me that our relationship took priority over his brother's convenience. His brother didn't move. He just sat there, looking between us like my boyfriend had said something in a foreign language. "Oh," he said, and then he stayed. I looked at my boyfriend, waiting for him to say something stronger, to insist, to stand up for us. But he just gave up. He looked down at his plate, uncomfortable, and started eating. Like his brother sitting down, uninvited, was just an unfortunate fact of life. Like there was nothing to be done. "Babe," I said quietly, my voice tight, "can you please ask him to give us privacy?" My boyfriend looked pained, trapped between me and his brother, and instead of choosing me, instead of asking his grown-ass brother to respect a simple request, he got defensive. "He lives here too," he said, like that settled it. "So do I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching our private dinner dissolve into another group meal, feeling my boyfriend's brother chew loudly across from me, while my boyfriend avoided my eyes. That was the moment I realized it would never get better. Because to him, asking his brother to leave a room, even for one dinner, was too much. It was too uncomfortable. It disrupted the family unit. And I wasn't part of that unit. I never would be. I was just the woman trapped in their world, begging for scraps of attention and being told I was asking for too much. The worst part about living in that suffocating house wasn't the lack of privacy, or the endless cleaning, or even his ex-girlfriend haunting every corner of our relationship. The worst part was what happened every single time I tried to talk about it. I'd bring up something, anything, that was bothering me, and within minutes the conversation would flip. Suddenly, I was the issue. I was too sensitive, too demanding, too emotional, too American, too unwilling to understand his culture, his family, his situation. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he'd say, when I mentioned feeling excluded from conversations in their language. "You're overreacting," he'd tell me when I expressed hurt about the messages with his ex. "You knew my family was close when you moved here," he'd remind me when I begged for boundaries with his brothers. Every concern I raised was met with the same defensive script. He'd sigh like I was exhausting him. He'd look at me like I was being unreasonable, and then he'd turn it around. "Why are you so bothered by this? Why can't you just let it go?" I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe the problem wasn't the situation, it was me. I'd moved to a foreign country and expected everything to revolve around my comfort. How selfish, how entitled. So I'd apologize. I'd tell him I didn't mean to make him feel attacked. I'd reassure him that I understood his position, that I wasn't trying to come between him and his family, that I just wanted to feel like I mattered too, and he'd soften. He'd hug me. He'd tell me we'd work on it, and I'd feel relief flood through me, because the fight was over, and maybe, just maybe, things would get better. But they never did. Because working on it meant me swallowing my feelings. It meant me adjusting my expectations. It meant me becoming smaller and quieter and more accommodating until there was nothing left of me but a woman who cleaned and cooked and never complained. I started keeping my concerns to myself. It was easier that way. Less conflict, less guilt, less feeling like I was the villain in my own relationship. But the silence was killing me, because every time I didn't speak up, I disappeared a little more. And he didn't even notice. I suggested couples therapy in a moment of desperation. I thought maybe, just maybe, if a trained professional explained to him what I'd been trying to say for months, he'd finally hear it. Maybe a neutral third party could break through the defensive walls he'd built. Maybe this could save us. He agreed. I clung to that agreement like a lifeline. The first session, I was nervous but hopeful. I sat on the couch next to him, holding his hand, ready to finally be heard. The therapist was warm and professional. She asked us to each share our perspective on what brought us there. I went first. I tried to be fair. I explained the living situation, the lack of boundaries, the messages with his ex, the feeling of being invisible in my own relationship. I was careful not to attack him. I used "I feel" statements, just like every article on healthy communication tells you to. And then it was his turn. He started fine. But the moment the therapist gently probed deeper, asking him to consider how his actions might have impacted me, he shut down. Completely. His face went blank. His answers became one-word responses. I don't know. Maybe. I guess. The therapist tried different approaches. She reframed questions. She validated his feelings. She explicitly told him this wasn't about blame. Nothing worked. And when she finally asked, "Do you think your partner feels supported in this relationship?" a question so straightforward a child could answer it, he broke. Not with accountability, with defensiveness. "I'm trying my best," he said, his voice shaking. "I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I feel attacked all the time." I stared at him in disbelief. He felt attacked. I'd spent months walking on eggshells, doing all the emotional labor, begging for scraps of consideration, and he was the victim. The therapist gently tried to redirect. "I hear that you're feeling defensive, but can we talk about why your partner might be feeling?" "I don't want to be." "The bad guy," he interrupted, tears forming in his eyes. "Everyone always makes me feel like I'm doing everything wrong." The session ended with him playing the wounded party and me feeling guilty for even bringing us there. Every session after that followed the same pattern. He'd shut down, refuse to engage, and then cry about how hard this all was for him. Therapy was supposed to be our safe space. Instead, it became another place where I couldn't be heard. I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt happy. Not content, not resigned, actually happy. The kind of joy that makes you want to get out of bed. The kind of peace that doesn't require constant negotiation. I'd been fighting so hard to make this work, to fix him, to fix us, to fix a situation that was fundamentally broken, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe. Every day was a battle. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every moment required me to make myself smaller, quieter, more understanding. And for what? For a man who couldn't prioritize me over his ex-girlfriend. For a man who couldn't set a single boundary with his brothers. For a man who turned every attempt at honest communication into a referendum on his character. For a man who cried in therapy about how hard he had it, while I drowned silently beside him. I'd moved across the world believing in a partnership. But partnerships require two people who can see each other clearly, who can hold space for each other's needs, who can grow together instead of staying frozen in old patterns. And he couldn't do any of that. Not because he was a bad person, he wasn't, but because he'd never actually left the cult. Physically, yes, but emotionally, psychologically, he was still trapped in that closed system, still operating by those old rules of loyalty and enmeshment, still unable to separate his identity from the people who'd survived that trauma with him. I couldn't save him from that. I couldn't love him hard enough to make him ready. I couldn't sacrifice myself into making space that he'd never be able to fill. The truth I'd been avoiding crashed over me all at once. You cannot build a home with someone who hasn't left their own childhood. You cannot create a future with someone who's still living in their past. And you cannot keep disappearing pieces of yourself, hoping that eventually there will be enough room for you. There wouldn't be. There never would be. I deserved a partner who chose me without needing to be convinced. I deserved a relationship where voicing a concern didn't require an apology. I deserved to feel seen, heard, and prioritized, not like an inconvenient outsider in someone else's family system. I deserved peace. And I finally understood that peace would never exist in this house. So I started planning my exit. Here's what I learned the hard way. Shared history is not a substitute for current respect. Trauma bonds are powerful, but they don't Excuse bad behavior. You cannot fix a partner's enmeshment if they refuse to see it as a problem. And choosing your own mental health over someone's refusal to grow isn't sensitivity, it's survival. I wasn't too demanding for wanting privacy, boundaries, or emotional priority. I was asking for the bare minimum of a healthy relationship, and the fact that he made me feel guilty for that was the problem. Walking away wasn't failure. It was finally choosing myself. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this woman's journey from hopeful immigrant to self-aware survivor? What was the moment that hit you hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know which chapter resonated with you the most. Was it the dinner crasher, the secret messages, or the therapy wall? On a scale of 1 to 10, how relatable was this story of choosing yourself over a relationship that required you to disappear? And if you were moved by following this journey from trapped and isolated to finally seeing the truth in he grew up in a cult and now I'm trapped in his enmeshed family life, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to receive more emotional, eye-opening, and empowering stories like this one. Leave a like if you believe prioritizing your mental health over someone's refusal to grow is self-preservation, not sensitivity. Comment whether you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship or struggled with a partner's enmeshment with their family. We will see you in the next story because everyone deserves a relationship where they don't have to disappear to make room for someone else.